Okay, I hope you are ready to receive Avril's magnum opus, object-based correspondence theory of truth as a method in metaphysics. And it's Avril Styrman from University of Helsinki.
Okay, thank you, and thank you everyone for coming. So let's start. Philosophy has progressed over the past century in various ways, but it has not made efficient progress in answering its fundamental questions or in developing related theories. So we have lots of disagreement. We can see it from the Field Papers 2020 survey. More disagreement, and even more disagreement. So we can perhaps conclude that philosophy lacks efficient naturalist progress, which means science-like progress, in answering its fundamental questions or in developing related theories. This means that philosophy lacks orderly and efficient processes where specialists in one area produce a series of increasingly complete answers to its fundamental questions, which results not just in more knowledge, but in the systematic accumulation of knowledge, and where the history of the discipline becomes largely irrelevant. Now, if we are moderate naturalists and consider natural science and philosophy continuous and complementary, then we are inclined to consider this lack of efficient naturalist progress as a problem. So we just have to face it. Yes, it's a problem, and we try to resolve it some way. And we are also inclined to ask whether philosophically informed scientific methods could help remedy this problem. Like inductive metaphysics from Gerhard Schurtz's group and methodological naturalism from Mrs. Emery both encourage metaphysicians to apply the methods of science. So we can conclude that moderate naturalists are inclined to ask whether philosophically informed methods could help remedy the lack of efficient naturalist progress. And a philosophically informed version of the classical method of science would be the first candidate. That is, philosophically informed means basically that we must always be ready to accept criticism, so we don't take any dogmatic attitudes. All right. So the plan is to introduce the classical method, then the strategy of applying the method in metaphysics, and then to formulate this object-based correspondence theory of truth, and defend its axioms against rival hypotheses. And then it is reviewed how the method could foster naturalist progress and review its contemporary obstacles. Now, the classical method, it begins by defining problems, questions, or tasks, such as concepts to be clarified and phenomena to be explained. And it proceeds into analysis, where basic concepts applied in the problem resolution are defined, and principles that resolve the problems are sought from the literature or invented. Then the principles that best respect some naturalist criteria are adopted as axioms of the theory. Then synthesis, the method concludes there, where it is demonstrated how the problems are actually resolved in terms of the axioms, using truth-preserving reasoning, for instance, by deducing explanations of phenomena from the axioms, by defining concepts in terms of the axioms. So that's it. That's a three-step method. It sounds very simple, but actual application might be, and often is, of course, very complex. And the classical method, it equals the axiomatic method, but only when both are understood as the fusion of problem definition, analysis, and synthesis. But the axiomatic method can be applied, for instance, as a tool of demonstration only. So it is really the classical method. It's been applied in so many classical famous works and almost everywhere. Also in philosophy, there's some applications. And there's also quite a few characterizations, very notable ones here. So we don't, we also got these. Okay. And now to the strategy of applying the method. So the goal here is to formulate a relevant and a sufficiently constrained problem and to build a virtuous, minimal, and extendable theory that resolves it. Now I compare it to Valdi's problem. That it's to outline how several theories of truth function in the context of the correspondence theory. So that's a big problem. And then the problem here in object-based correspondence theory is just to formulate the correspondence intuition. That's a very minimal problem. Now, in fact, it's just one initial part if we want to systematically or systematize the unification of theories of truth. So that's needed there. And virtuousness as the goal means that naturalist criteria serve as heuristics for evaluating theories and their principles. It means the more virtuous, the better. And this can also be seen as a proof from contradiction with the virtues. A theory that violates the virtues more is rejected. So I see this as a path towards more systematic argumentation. And notably, we do not require Aristotelian or Kantian a priori truths, but the best available hypotheses or theories suffice. Now, let's look a little bit at the virtues. And their study is an independent field, and it's a very old and huge study also. We may start from Thomas Kuhn. He produced this kind of a list of virtues, and since then we've seen lots of finer distinction, interrelations, and organizations. So there's lots of literature, but we don't need to go to specifics. And this is just one taxonomy. We just go through it quickly. The formal virtues, they are basically the characteristics of an axiomatic system. So we already kind of went through them in the definition of the method. And then ethical virtues, they simply say that don't cheat, and if you violate some virtues, then openly acknowledge it. And then we can look at the aesthetic virtues and notify that they're generally acknowledged to be unreliable. And that's because a familiar theory is beautiful to the person who's familiar with it. So we don't use them. So we can focus on explanatory and pragmatic virtues. And typically, explanatory virtues are the most important, and we look at the pragmatic virtues only after we disagree with explanatory virtues. Might be exceptions. You don't have to remember all these virtues because I cite them whenever I use them. We can follow Aaron McMullin and make a division to internal virtues of a theory and contextual virtues. And then define diachronic virtuousness as a development of these other explanatory virtues over time. So that's it for the virtues. There's a lot of interrelations. We could talk about this for many hours. Okay, but how to apply the virtues in this build-up? So in philosophy, for every thesis, that's one there's an antithesis, that's not one. So I show first that the naturalist criteria favor the thesis over extreme positions like eliminativism says that the thesis is false, and error theory or skepticism, that we mistakenly think that we perceive something that requires the thesis, or whatever like that. So I see these antitheses as methodological tools to make the thesis better. but not as obstacles for applying it in an axiomatic system. So I don't see that we should endlessly contemplate these extreme positions, at least not so far that they would prevent us from building big systems. And there might be also relevant alternatives that should also be rejected by virtue-based argument. But the goal is that the axioms of OCT do not have many relevant alternatives. The goal is exactly to make it plausible and virtuous. The axioms state something that is compatible with virtually anything, any good theory. Like they're compatible with all the best theories, and they leave open only what the best theories disagree about. So there are merely minimal and sufficient ontological commitments for resolving the given problem in one way, without excluding anything. So this means that they are quite virtuous. So that's the goal. And it doesn't end here. I identify several hypotheses that together suffice for resolving the problem. And if they are not just individually virtuous, but are also mutually consistent and have strong explanatory relations, then the system is internally coherent. And the axioms, so to speak, support one another. And then when we have this good basis, we can build a safe building, like brick by brick. So this is the goal. And now we'll formulate the theory. So again, the problem is to formulate the common sense conception of truth, the correspondence intuition. And the task is confined to human beings' non-self-referential present assertions about the present, like it is sunny now in Helsinki. And these assertions must be mutually consistent. All right. And now we construct the theory as a resolution to the problem. The first axiom, it's just that the present exists, does not exclude anything. The present comprises space and object in space, and it explains why the present appears to exist. So the first step is to reject an antithesis of the axiom, like the hypothesis that nothing exists. We just saw in Andrew Brenner's speech that it requires more explanation. The antithesis requires more explanation than the axiom, and is therefore more complex. Well, one difficulty there I saw that he referred to applied empty worlds. They are themselves quite suspicious. So if we only accept this world, we can, for instance, insist that the one who says that nothing exists, he must explain the perception in this world. Like, you must explain the perceptions in this world. How can we see something when there's nothing exists? So it must be empirically sufficient. Now, if you don't explain perceptions, then your theory is empirically insufficient. But if you do explain them, then you must appeal to some abstract or ersatz entities which make your theory more complex. So that's what it would look like. So, but for now, I suppose that it's quite clear. Of course, we would have to make lengthy arguments to make everybody convinced, but now I just assume that the hypothesis that nothing exists is empirically insufficient or more complex than this axiom. And then show that the axiom is compatible with lots of good theories, and there are lots of their alternatives. Like it's compatible with the present is all that exists, but it's also compatible with the mutually exclusive alternative that the past and or the future exist too. It's compatible with both. It's compatible with the present being objective or subjective, compatible with determinism and indeterminism, compatible with the existence of causality and its negation, and it's compatible with absolute simultaneity and with relativistic physics. But here I want to point out a little complication. Like, consider that we have conceptualization of Helsinki in our minds. We have a mental picture of Helsinki. Now, if all parts of Helsinki exist absolutely simultaneously, then there's no problem in our mental image referring to Helsinki or even corresponding to it. But if we think, for instance, that theory of relativity, special and general relativity are true, then we have a quite big problem, because the top and bottom of the buildings, and in fact, any difference in altitude makes a difference in time. So we have lots of parts there that exist at different times. So we have to make some like reconciliation if we take relativistic physics seriously. For instance, that the present consists of parts that exist relativistic simultaneously, and while other parts exist at different times. So, and relatedly, we have invited Dr. Suntola, who seeks out a theory that explains relativistic phenomena without making time and distance variables, and Dr. Krizak, who maintains that philosophers should not take the relativity principle too seriously. So, but the most important conclusion here is that the axiom 1 holds in any case. We can make it hold. We can force it somehow. We can make it plausible and compatible with the theory of relativity. And that's content naturalism, isn't it? So now, supposedly, it's compatible with, it's better than eliminativism, better than the theory that nothing exists, and it's compatible with several good theories, so it's quite virtuous, and we are on a quite safe setting with axiom 1, and we continue into axiom 2. Okay, so there's limited time, so I don't go into even this level of details. I'll just skip the slides and conclude that axiom 2 is better than eliminativism, like Skinner's behaviorism. It's better than Cartesian dualism. And all the main theories of mind, whether they accept qualia or not, like reductive physicalism, unreductive physicalism, dual aspect monism, brain-mind identity theory, and functionalism, they all conform to this simple mental realism. So it's quite well justified. And then I do the same with ontological realism, that the proper part of the present is independent of my mind. So I show that there are verse positions. And here, let's point out that Professor Pihlström notes that also that we shouldn't take solipsism too seriously, but we can take it as a methodological tool that makes our intelligible thesis better. And then there's the never-dying brain in that idea, and we found that even Professor Schurz is one of the guys who have given an argument from virtuousness. So they argue that yes, brain in that theory can explain everything that your ontological realism can explain, but it's just more complex because there's those computers, mystical motives, or technical knowledge of the programmers. Okay, so this means that we have rejected the brain in that thesis based on naturalist criteria, and we have identified a standard virtue-based argument against it. All right. So this is a little bit different than the others, because ontological realism is better than solipsism and the brain in that idea, but solipsism and brain in that, they are also compatible with everything. All right. So now I make a definition. Assertion and its truth conditions. So the present person's non-self-referring assertion, or his belief, judgment, statement, Q about the present is a mental object realized in the mind of the person at a certain location in the present that affirms or denies that a certain property phi is realized in a certain object or location. So then the standard truth-making schema, the Q is true if and only if the property holds in that location, otherwise it's false. Then we can make theorems. So we, so to speak, we input, for instance, the assertion, it is sunny now in Helsinki, to the theory, and the theory outputs its truth maker. That's the atmospheric conditions in Helsinki. So this is like in, for instance, in physics, you have a theory, there you input some empirical data in the theory, and it gives you a prediction of how the data will look like in another time. So this is naturalistic mode of working. Okay, and then the final axiom, the law of non-contradiction. One property cannot both belong and not belong to the same part of the present, the same respect. And then we derive a theorem, consistency of correspondence truths. Like all correspondence truths must be mutually consistent, and we make a proof by contradiction that axiom 4 entails, together with the other axioms, definition that Q and not Q cannot be true, and therefore all true assertions are mutually consistent. So, theorem. So that's a very simple system. And now we ask that, can it produce progress? How it could produce progress. So Ilkka Niiniluoto used four ways, distinctions, 4 approaches to progress, and I will handle only 2, semantic and noetic. First, semantic progress as increasing truth likeness. So virtuousness of a theory is the only available indicator of its truth likeness. Now, if we define truth likeness as virtuousness, then more virtuous theories are by definition more truth-like, even if the virtues would never lead us to the discovery of a true theory. So we saw already there's much debate about this truth likeness and virtuousness, their relation, but here I just talk about the increase of virtuousness. So I talk about progress as increasing virtuousness. And now the overall reason why the classical method has good chances to foster virtuousness is that it institutionalizes the virtues and systematizes the interplay of the top level and details. So start from the top, a better big picture. If we get a better big picture theory, then it comprises top level progress. Because it's better, that's progress. But it also facilitates identifying the relevant points of contention and allocation of resources for their deeper study. And it is likely that this fosters progress on the details. And that's progress about the details. And then better relevant details enable building a better relevant totality. And that's progress too. So we got a circle of progress here. This is one way that the classical method applied in holistic totalities can foster progress. And then we'll turn to noetic, progress as increasing understanding. And note that an axiomatic formulation of a theory facilitates its understandability, justifiability, constructive criticism, and extending it. An axiomatic system integrates its components and yields understanding of how they hang together. An explication of understandable basic concepts and ontological commitments allows defining further concepts unambiguously. This order separates principles from concepts defined in terms of them and theorems derived from them, and it simultaneously integrates them. It enables seeing what presupposes what entails what are the roles or ranges of application of different concepts and axioms, and which concepts and axioms can or cannot be omitted. This supplies a way to understand what has been achieved and what are the relevant challenges or advanced questions. the method gives us the considerable advantages of increased clarity, rigor, and elegance, and allows us to see more clearly what it is that we are doing while we are doing it. Okay, these characterizations align with Delson, Firing, and friends in that noetic progress occurs when people are placed in a position to increase their understanding, and where an agent understands a phenomenon to the extent that it accurately and comprehensively represents a network of dependence relations in which the phenomenon stands or fails to stand to other things. So here the representation of a network of dependence relations comprises the axiomatic system that captures the heart of the system, of the phenomenon, and justification of its axioms over their alternatives. So it plays very well with the noetic progress, I hope. Okay, and then finally, obstacles to applying the classical method this way. So I have discovered that a remnant of positivism that still dominates philosophy practically hinders the application of the classical method in building holistic systems. And it is the view that philosophy is exclusively a study of details. Now we can see this from the Vienna Circle Manifesto and from Carnap's writings, that a stone will be carefully added to stone and a safe building will be erected. But, contrary to their expectations, we have seen a trend toward over-specialization, fragmentation of knowledge, and unresolved controversies. And there's a parallel to radically heterogeneous aims, methods, criteria, and schools in philosophy. And Carlo Ciallucci points out that the specialist view is insufficient for philosophers have opposing views on key issues, and therefore all work is not cumulative. Now, recall that we wanted to construct a relatively safe building on relatively safe principles. Now, if we can't build on principles that are as safe as this, we're practically stuck on the ground, contemplating details in the absence of a clear basis, like much like philosophy is today. And it really seems that we are indeed stuck. And I'll show just one reason why we are practically stuck. So, in philosophy, there's a huge quantity of detailed studies about every angle of every topic. But in the present study, many topics were handled only in outline. Then you send it to a journal, and a random reviewer sees that some random details of some topic are missing, which makes no difference whatsoever to the big picture, but they are very important to the reviewer because it's his specialty. Now, you may fill in the details, but the next reviewer sees that some other details are missing. So there's never-ending number of details about everything. And adding enough details is impossible in a normal article because there's a finite space. And therefore, you cannot build a holistic system in a normal article, and therefore, the specialist view as an exclusive method hinders efficient naturalist progress. So that's just one way, one sketch, and conclusions. The past 100 years prove that the specialist view of philosophical work in the absence of clear criteria does not yield efficient progress on big questions of metaphysics. We can always say that, okay, there's good progress and we are happy, but if we are true or we are honest, then we can note the current state and acknowledge that no, there's no efficient science-like progress. Therefore, we need virtue-guided interplay between the big picture approach and the details where unification and specialization are balanced. And this could be achieved systematically through the classical method if the specialist view were not exclusive. So that's it.
Okay, floor is open for right. Floor is open for questions. Stop there.
Yes, I had a couple of questions. about this kind of the role of representation and the virtues. The first of one, I'd say that it's maybe the easiest. How is this kind of correspondence theory, for example, not tasky or something like that? How does it kind of differ from this kind of ordinary correspondence theories in logic, for example?
Well, the Tarskian theory is about reasoning with the truth predicate, in a way. I believe that's its main function. It's not, this is just like to capture the correspondence intuition when a human being stands here and looks at the chair. We don't need any Tarskian concepts in that.
May I? Okay.
Next. Oh, good catch.
Thanks for the talk. So probably it didn't slip your notice that you are building a foundation and putting stone by stone on it, as was your quote from the positivists who somehow were wrong in saying that. Or did I get something? Well, that's not the main point. The main point would be we could take a page out of Quine's book and say, no, we don't do a foundation stone. We are like mariners on Noetic's ship, rebuilding and rebuilding our vessel as we go through the seas. So we don't actually need the foundation. We can, that has to remain solid all the time. It's enough that we have enough to grant support while we are continuing on in our efforts. So I'm not sure that you need to get that kind of a brick layer done before you can get other stuff done. And then if you don't need that, then I'm not sure what that says about the method.
Well, okay. Well, I can only say that what's the current state? Currently, we haven't seen efficient naturalist progress with whatever methods philosophers have used. So I just propose that we might achieve it by this method. You know, I might be wrong, but I think that we need some kind of a foundation. Everybody has some kind of a worldview, even if they wouldn't write it down. So it's also about honesty. Like, let's take one example. Well, if you have a concept of abstract, you can apply the concept of abstract whatever you want. You can invent whatever you want, like empty worlds, and they make big proceedings about that. But if you are really like nominalists and we have sparse ontology, there's nothing abstract. It's just mental. Everything abstract is mental. There's only one world. So it makes the argumentation, whole argumentation gets a lot of simpler. So this is maybe this answers your question.
Thank you very much. Enjoyed the talk very much. I'm interested in philosophical disputes and the fact that sometimes they don't have resolution. This is why you mentioned they cannot be summed up as a body of knowledge in the same way. And the fact that they do not agree reminds me of something that David Chalmers wrote about the disagreement between him and Daniel Dennett. And after years of disagreement, they just went through the same arguments, and then in the end, he just said, look, we will never agree. We have very different basic intuitions, and it's not even something can be formalized. So the source of the agreement between them could not be formalized in a clear way. It had to do something with some vague intuitions that were completely different. Perhaps predispositions had to do with their neural connections, their genetics, their education, I don't know what. So it's hard to capture the actual source of the difference or the disagreement between philosophers. That's a comment.
Sure. It is hard. For instance, the possible worlds thinking. Even that, if you have possible worlds thinking, you can do whatever. And your thinking can go wherever. And if you just have a loose concept of abstract, it can go forever, wherever, forever. No. You can never reach. You have to agree about the very basics. Then you don't have to believe in it, but you have to agree that, okay, we talk in the context of this postulate. That's it. So if you can agree, then you have a chance to understand somebody.
Okay.
So, thank you. I put another question because of this debate here. Just tell me whether I understood you right. I mean, I think in this talk, we heard about the axiomatic method, which is an implicit axiomatization. So we have a holistic in the sense that we have several axioms which simultaneously characterize several concepts, right? And you get a coherent theory out of that. And that is different from the positivists, meaning of step by step, because they wanted to define step by step every concept singularly, individually, right? But that's not possible. I mean, you do implicit in physics and so on also. You have axiomatic systems. So in this sense, it's holistic. But your point was, nevertheless, we need a foundation, but not a foundation in the sense of empirical reductionism, that we want to define every concept like empirical or something. But your foundation is a clear set, if I understood you right, a clear set of virtues by which you can select the best theories, right? And then you say, well, the axiom should be that what is common to all the best theories. That was, right? For that, we need this basic of clear criteria. Is this?
Yes, that was
is
the goal.
Is it right? Did I
that was the
understand
goal,
you right?
yes. You are
So
exactly right.
Okay.
Yes, you are again right. You know, I forgot to reply that, yes, positivists,
So
they didn't have the foundation. That's what their problem. Yeah.
Okay, good.
Or they had maybe some foundation, but it was quite ambiguous. Maybe.
Perhaps this is not the time to discuss misunderstandings of the user code.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you. And last question from Lauri.
Yes, thanks. This is a kind of follow-up because I was thinking about theory virtues and theories, because I've been kind of trying to contextualize theory virtues in the functioning of theories as maps or as models or something like that. And in order to have this kind of map, you have, for example, a simple theory is a good theory, like a simple map that kind of points out the relevant locations is a good map for some purpose. And I was just kind of wondering that, can you kind of use then this kind of theory virtues for foundational reasoning, for example, proving the external world or something like that? Because in order to make sense of theory virtues in the first place, you have to have a world that the kind of theory at least aims to depict, and in order for the virtues to make sense, you just have to have this kind of representational relationships in place. And then you end up in some kind of circle, like the Cartesian circle or no miracles argument of using abduction to prove abduction, or something like that.
Yeah, well, in fact, I haven't thought about that. I can't deny it. It might be correct, but okay, it's enough for me that these are, after all, the naturalist criteria that are applied in science and are like very common. So despite those arguments, we can still take the naturalist criteria and conclude that, okay, they haven't been systematically tied to philosophical method yet, and we can try it. Like earlier, before this, no efficient progress. Maybe there will be with the naturalist criteria. If not, then we can drop them too and try something new.